Everyone. So excited to be here, especially with my good friend Karl Dakin, who is just, in my opinion, one of the leaders in the financing community. And our show is Successful Funding. Today, the key word is negotiation, that I think is instrumental in raising capital, but also instrumental in all other aspects of doing business and communicating with people. Chat's wide open and really welcome your comments. Uh, really appreciate it in a sense that it offers us direction and allowing us to be more relevant. With that said, I'll introduce Karl. Karl can bring you up to date and we'll go from here.
Sounds good. Thanks, Don, for letting me be on your program again. For those of you who are in the audience, I welcome you to use the chat function as much as possible to let us know you're there, share your information, and more particularly ask questions where we might be able to talk about a topic that's of key interest to you, because Don and I know each other, and yeah, we're learning from each other's conversations, but we really would like to share what we can and what we know with everyone in the audience. I work with funding, and I describe that as somebody who's running a business who needs more resources than they have, and they either don't know where to look or how to get the funding, or they have some other challenge, or maybe they just don't have the time. And I come in to try to help them figure out what they need, who might give it to them, what deals might look like. And as Don set the um, topic for today is negotiation. Negotiation is always involved. And I have worked with hundreds and hundreds of negotiations. And going back to my early days where I was practicing law and dealing with contracts more than I do today, one of the things that I find out in negotiation is that most people have trouble defining what it is they actually want to get out of the deal.
Mhm.
They'll go, hey, let's go do this. But this is not defined in terms of an outcome or an exit or where they cash in their chips or however you want to describe that. And so you have really no, as they call it, legal meeting of the minds. You have two people who are doing something who each think that they're both doing something together, and when it turns out that they're not in 100% alignment with what they wanted to do, then problems arise. And or the first time their plan encounters a challenge, one thinks they should go left, the other thinks they should go right, and there's no provision in their agreement for what they want to do. And so negotiation is a series of engagements that are supposed to lead to a deal, and that deal needs to reflect what each side wants to get out of the deal, what they're going to take home from the deal. And so before you start the negotiation, it would be really good to have something very definitive in mind for what it is you want to accomplish through this new relationship. So I'll use that as my starting comments for this morning.
Well, that's terrific. And I always know when I have you on the show, Karl, you're such a wealth of knowledge and more importantly, experience that is knowledge based. A saying I heard, which I just finished that Stephen Covey book, was understand before you try to be understood. And in most cases, people don't take the time to see what's valuable and important to the other party because you may be at a different place, which is fine. But, and the best negotiation is an accommodation or a compromise to understand, hear what people are saying, be a good listener, and it really takes away from the spirit of quality negotiation when you just go in and say, here's what I want, here's how it's all lined up. And now you've kind of cut off a lot of the conversation, the understanding, because how many times did you say, if I only knew that, I would have approached it in a different way? And sometimes time is important to people. Sometimes money is important to people. Sometimes ego and pride get into it. And why not ask the questions and kind of qualify and probe, and also give people an opportunity to be heard? And sometimes people just get overwhelmed by too much, too fast, without understanding. And that creates dissonance that doesn't necessarily have to be there. Plus, in most cases, you want a happy ending for all parties, right? So you want people to walk away from any agreement or relationship or transaction saying it was fair, person treated me with respect, and there was high levels of integrity, because that intent is so important, because you can always work the details, right? When you say, hey, I want 10, I want 11, well, that's pretty specific and definitive. But you also want to put the person as, hey, that person cared. That person showed an interest, and it wasn't just a bunch of numbers. It was two people or a group of people getting together. With that said, Carrie wins the door prize today, first to show up on comments. And what I appreciate so much is it shows comments are working. So knowing that and then knowing the comment is so essential. So thank you, Carrie. And with that said, I'll share your joke. What do you call the best Bee Gees cover band of all time? The Bee's Knees? Well, I'll go along with that too. So, Karl, what have you found to be foundational to quality negotiations, as well as counterproductive uh, situations that take away from them?
Um, yeah, there's so many answers to those two questions. The thing I find that is best is to step into the negotiation in a series of stages. So you're basically saying, yeah, we want to do a deal, but we may not know that the deal is actually possible. So you start off with the premise that this is a test, and we want to verify, validate that this can be done, because a deal is a deal. There's one deal, but there are two agendas. The two parties to the transaction each need to achieve their outcomes to be happy with this, and you want them in harmony with each other. And sometimes when you start talking with somebody else about doing a deal, you may not know for certain that each side can come away happy. So you start off by saying something where this is what I'm looking to achieve. And then you ask the question, what are you looking to achieve? And by keeping in mind that you have two outcomes all the time, and the deal is basically trying to marry those two together in some way that's mutually beneficial, then you have a greater chance of surfacing issues that may say, no, we can't reach a deal. So we don't spend a whole lot of time and energy going back and forth. But more importantly, you won't miss a key issue or a key outcome that the other person has to have in order for them to come out with a happy deal. And it's interesting or painful, depends on how you want to look at it, how objective you are in observing this. If you're in the deal, then it's very painful. If you're watching somebody else blow up a deal, it's interesting. But the times where you look at a deal and you go, why did you leave that out? This was clearly important to you, but there's no reference to it in the entire document. None of the conversations, none of the going back and forth communications mention this. And then after the deal signed, somebody goes, well, where's this? And you're going, you never mentioned it before. Why are you bringing it up now? And as you say, Don, if it had been asked and talked about and negotiated properly, it would have been in the deal, and it would have been sealed into that deal in a way where you at least would have been mutually working towards that outcome. So that's the one thing that I think is commonly there. But the other thing that I think is a challenge to doing a deal is quite often the people in the deal don't understand what it is that they want as their outcome. They think, well, if we do something, that the outcome will naturally follow. And quite often I'm talking to my clients, or I'm in a deal and I'm going, okay, stop. what is success? How do you measure success? I want a detailed, measurable thing. And I said, let's just for fun, let's make it easy enough to understand that a judge or jury can understand what you just said. And so if there's a dispute, they can go yes or no. It's not a maybe, I can't figure it out kind of a thing. And all too often, and I would say most contracts failed this requirement of defining clearly what the outcome needs to be, to a point that there can be no dispute over whether the outcome was achieved or not achieved. And as a result, you see contracts drift, or something happens and nobody understands why, and the whole thing starts falling apart. And somewhere along that path, things can go ugly. And that's where courtrooms and mediation and arbitration come into play. But that's yet another thing. There's a number of good things you can do in an agreement. But I have found that if you talk about the relationship as paired outcomes, you do this, I do this. Don't have one person go on like an endless stream and then the other person go on like an endless stream with no connecting the dots on a point by point, stage by stage process thing, so that if you blow up here, you don't have the other person going through the full drill to get to and find out that they're not going to get what they want, that this thing was gone and dead long ago. I call it like question and answer, where I go, every time one person does something, what's the other person supposed to do? If they're not supposed to do anything, then even say that. You don't have to do anything until I do these two things or these three things. And so I use kind of an engineering process description. I use languaging, which the lay person, that is the person who has to do the deal, understands. I get very frustrated with lawyers, and I am a lawyer, so I speak from the heart on this. Why write an agreement for the two parties that neither of the parties understand? It happens all the time where you go, yeah, legalese, it may be precise enough to go to court, but if the two parties who have to implement the deal don't understand it, there's a high probability they're going to go off the road and something's going to go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. And what comes to mind is, just like in any negotiation, even outside of financing, you want to know really a couple things. What's the most important element? So let's get that out front, because you can cover 80% of the other things and find out the big elephant in the room was the one that wasn't discussed. And maybe that's a strategy to try and get as much done and then deal with the hardest part instead of starting with it. And the other one is asking, if I can satisfy all of your needs, are you willing to go forward? In business, people would say, well, if I can do this and can I do that, can I get a better deal? Can I get it for less? Or if I bought quantity? And I always say, well, if we're able to do that, are you willing to commit today? And if they said no, I said, well, then it doesn't really matter, does it? Because everything has to be mutual and binding on both. Or you'll end up with, hey, we worked this deal, but I thought about it, now I want a better deal. And now you're just kind of dumbing down, and you're finding out it is transactional and not relationship oriented. And it also gives you an opportunity to say it's not possible. If someone said, Karl, I need to raise money in 3 days and I just met you, you would just say, even Superman can't help you in this situation. With that said, I want to recognize Beverly Glazer, who has just gotten better with time, especially time that we've been spending on Tuesdays with the Women's Empowerment event. Had just a lovely show yesterday with an 18-year-old young lady, Imogen Ayers, who was just so good in showing youth and how good people can be at a young age. And a lot of times they don't get that recognition, or they're grouped into whatever. But I also think Beverly, just like Karl, makes everybody better, whoever she's with, and goes out of their way to really put somebody on a higher pedestal that they deserve. So thank you, Beverly. So Karl, What has been one of the most interesting negotiations that you've really learned a lot from, or have a hard time forgetting?
Um, yeah, this is a similar question somebody asked me the other day. Actually, it was Ford on Monday, who said, Carl, please describe a key event in your life. And I replied that my life has been like a pinball. I've had so many bounces that it's hard to pick one out of the mess of my legacy here. But um, I've been involved in some big dollar complex negotiations. Some of these have been after the first deal blew up, and we're trying to maybe rehab, repair a relationship that has gone astray for one reason or another. And this is an area where things are not going right. People are upset. They're not getting what they wanted. They're in most cases, as I said, partly to blame because they didn't define what they wanted well enough. But it's hostile at this point in time. In fact, attorneys are in the room and they're there, and their agenda is supposed to be supporting the client, but all too often they're ready to get out the boxing gloves and go at it because they're trained litigators, and that's what they do. They're not necessarily trained negotiators and or problem solvers or dispute resolution solvers. So I went through American Arbitration Association training on mediation and arbitration so I could facilitate dispute resolution. And I still think that the whole system, and this is commonly me, doesn't work the way it should. And part of the problem is that once people get angry with each other and square off, then they start looking for who's to blame, and they keep trying to settle the thing by getting somebody to admit fault. And I think that's wrong. I think that the appropriate response is, Don, is as you say, figure out what everybody wanted to do when they started, figure out what's still doable today, and then try to create the shortest path from the mess that they're in towards that fallback objective. It may not be everything everybody originally wanted, but it may represent the bulk or the majority of what they're working towards. And if they can get off of pointing fingers and trying to figure out what's not working and get back to saying, let's start from scratch, what can we still do today that's mutually beneficial, they can probably get out of this head-to-head antagonism that may or may not benefit from having attorneys in the room, and particularly not those who are all about combating each other. They need somebody who might be more creative in structuring a deal to get as close back to the original goals as possible. And so I've been in the room where people are all but throwing stuff at each other, and you want to say, well, let's take a time out. What do you want to do today? Let's set everything aside. Let's forget everything in the rearview mirror. But if we were going to start today from scratch, what would we do to try to make you get the outcome you want? And in a couple of cases, we were able to put that on the table, and we were able to walk away from the deal with both sides thinking they had won, which is what mediation is supposed to accomplish, where they didn't totally lose, but they didn't totally win, which is a compromise by definition. But they didn't go to war, and they didn't spend countless resources, engaging in throwing bad comments back and forth. So I think that's where I would say that I had the opportunity to engage in the most complex type of negotiation after everything blew up.
Yeah, I think that's very important. A little echo there. The value I found of attorneys is primarily review and documentation, right? Most attorneys know the law and know how to, document what you want. I think a key distinction is having the attorney know in advance what your strategy is, right? So, in other words, strategy as far as negotiation is we don't want a bulldog running in here. We're not looking to get that extra piece of flesh, and they should be in alignment with what your desire and intention is. And in a lot of cases, and again, it's too general. Certain attorneys want to show how aggressive they can be, how there's so much on your side, and there should be balance towards the other party, and the same thing with their counsel. I tend to see a lot of attorneys create a layer of insulation that's not necessary, and I'd rather be talking directly to whoever it is I'm making a deal with than have their attorney talk to my attorney. That's usually what happens after something blows up. Because in a lot of cases, I found people were agitated about things again that weren't a part of the deal. It was they just felt they weren't being heard, they weren't being respected. And just by having that conversation, what would it take to make you happy? Or what is it? What is happening to make you unhappy? And through a negotiation, hopefully, that it's a physical process. You're sitting around a table or a Zoom, you can kind of read everybody's posture and mannerisms to know, hey, I hit a nerve there, or that's a sensitive area that we need to kind of be aware of. And it's really molding something that is a product of the time and effort and thought you put into it. And most people want for themselves what you want for themselves. So the idea is a win-win situation, not how much can we get from this. Because at the end of the day, if you are negotiating some financing, you either have the benefit of a quality transaction, which might lend itself to a referral or return business, as opposed to an unhappy situation. So Beverly loves what you're saying about bouncing and rebounding. It's all about personal growth. And I think as you get better as a negotiator, you get better as a business person, right? Because you have a reputation and people want to know, hey, was it fair? Was it fast? Was it comfortable? And those are kind of the intangibles that go along with it. So how do you prepare? Or I know you've got some thoughts on this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've got several thoughts that come into play. First, I want to take the word fair and throw it out the window. I don't think there's equity in an agreement. If you get what you want out of the agreement, it's as fair as it's going to be. What the other side gets, if they get rich, if they get famous, if they get something else, that's not on my side of the equation. I don't care what happens on the other side of the equation. In fact, I kind of like it if the other side of the equation is getting highly rewarded for working with me, because that tends to create all kinds of positives going forward. Um, I have found that too often it's been trained and taught in business schools and sales and so forth that people try to manipulate the negotiations, whereas you described they hold something back or they wait till the last minute to do something, which in my mind is deceptive and not really contributing to a good long-term relationship. But what happens is if you start your deal, say what you want, think of yourself standing on 2 feet, well balanced, and feeling comfortable that this fits within your mission, your strategy. If somebody starts tweaking a deal where they're trying to give you to give up more or something, it's like moving from 2 feet to 1 feet, and the deal becomes a little bit unbalanced. It becomes precarious. And what I have found is too often uh, current teachings and strategies will create tension in that relationship from the very first moment. It's too easy, too fragile for it to break almost instantly because the one side's been twisted too far over and they can't quite get back. So the other third point that I would make is that a deal is perfect the day that it's made, if at all. And negotiation isn't leading just up to the deal. It's a daily engagement within the relationship every day of the relationship. Where most problems occur is something happens after the deal is made that wasn't anticipated or was more impactful than was anticipated, and everybody keeps moving forward like nothing's changed in the deal. The deal needs to change. It
Mm-hmm.
needs to be adapted to this ongoing change. And if both sides are talking all the time, like, I'm still getting my part, are you still getting your part, and looking out for each other, that deal will go forward one way or another. But the first time somebody says, well, now this deal's working in my favor more so than it is the other person, and not considering or allowing for its impact, that is where the tension starts, and it ultimately may lead to a breakdown in the relationship. Because if one side is going to fail to meet their outcome, they don't want to be in the deal anymore. That's only natural for them. And if the other side is ignoring them, not communicating or abusing the relationship, then it's just going to set the table for a conflict. And quite frankly, we have the greatest legal system in the world, which has so many flaws in it that I never want to go into court ever. But it's better than everybody else's. But no business, usually, I will say 99.99% of the time, can justify going into court in a dispute because the cost associated with it, not only in terms of legal fees, but your time as a business owner, you just can't afford it. There's nowhere in your schedule where you say, hey, I can give up 4 days in depositions to do nothing except answer questions of the opposing counsel. That there's no budget that has that cost built into it. So don't go there. Every time that you think that something is moving away from your deal, negotiate new terms that work for both people. Keep this relationship moving forward. You do this with your wife or your spouse all the time. You may give up a lot, but you get to maintain the relationship. There's a reason why you want to do that. The value is there. Same things in doing a business deal. Just think through it and keep in mind, you're not the only person in the deal that you want to keep happy.
Yeah, I think that's very quality advice. I do agree that, I was always, the last thing I wanted to do was litigate or deal with the court system, because what's logical isn't always legal, right? And what you think should happen doesn't always happen. And what should happen doesn't always happen, because it could be arbitrary, could be discretionary. And all of a sudden you go in and for sure all the lawyers are going to get paid. It's not just a winner. I mean, so in other words, everybody's got a cost of time, effort, thought, and in most cases, distraction, right? So when you put something to bed, now you just move forward a clear mind. The other thing, the wheels of justice move very slowly, right? So especially if it's just a monetary something, the court systems aren't going to put you at the head of the list. So now you have months of anticipation, concern, all that other element, and the cost. And sometimes in the past, I would get together with somebody and I break down, here's where we're at, right? And here's what happens if we proceed this way. And we're going to pay this, we're going to do this. Why don't we take that money, that time, and build it into a settlement or an accommodation, and everybody knows the result, versus, plowing forward. Attorneys have a tendency to want to say, we can make this happen, we could win this, we can do this. And some people I found don't take control of things, aren't in charge of the process. They tend to follow it. And anytime you're dealing with professionals, whether they're accountants or lawyers or whatever, you should be the one who makes the decision for yourself based on whatever information you get. And I think that's important, because most people's businesses is their primary interest. The issues that come up through things that no one could expect or whatever are outside of your realm, right? So if you're in a manufacturing business, your focus is manufacturing. So I think it's being pragmatic, Sometimes taking a small hit over a big hit is preferable. And again, I think that's where good advisors and people you trust can come in and say, you know, through my experience, here's what the outcome will be. Do you want to invest in that? Or do you want to cut your loss, move forward, and just learn from it? What's your thoughts on that, Karl?
No, I think that this is during negotiations of any deal, you may be doing something for the 100th time. You may not need any help. You may know exactly what to do it blindfolded, do it standing on your head. If you're doing a deal that you've never done before, or maybe a deal with someone you've never done a deal with before, you may need other people to give you their insight, their advice to help you guide you through the process. And when I work with professionals, I don't want to go to a doctor for surgery and go, "Is this the first time you've ever done this operation?" I would like a much stronger answer than that. Yet a lot of times we will go to professionals, accountants, lawyers, whatever, and don't want to pick any single one out, but go, "Have you done this deal before? Have you helped somebody through this deal before?" Because that experience, learning from others, is something we've talked about on this show, that all of us can learn from our mistakes. Some of us, like myself, are so creative, we can make more mistakes than our lifetime will encompass. So we want to find somebody who's been there, done that, so they can go, "No, you shouldn't do that," or "Think of this," or "Look at this." And back to the fairness question, if I'm in a deal that I think is going to hurt, or the other person's not thinking through everything, I don't want to go back and spend all my time fixing that deal down the road because this person didn't understand. They didn't know that this was going to cause them an issue. So I will ask questions, because I don't like going back and fixing broken agreements. That, again, is, I go, I've already spent the time to create the agreement. I don't want to be constantly fixing the car, having it in the shop more often than I'm driving it. I think it makes a lot of sense to look through the agreement and test it. And so a lot of times you can use staging going in the negotiations, during the negotiations, say, "Is this what you had in mind?" And you put up a term sheet or a letter of intent, and you try to get those key terms on the table. You try to ferret them out or get them to surface so they don't show up later. And sometimes you can do this with a single document. Sometimes it takes 8, 10, or 12 iterations of this, because this is so new. Both sides may be experimenting, going someplace they've never been before, which requires more caution, more preparation than doing something you've done lots and lots of times. But look out for the other side. Make sure that the deal is going to get you where you want to go, because if the other side blows up before the deal is done, you're not going to get what you want out of the deal either. I mean, from self-interest at multiple fronts of how you spend your time, what you're doing, your relationships. If you can get one good lifetime relationship, that saves you creating 50 short-term relationships. So that's why everything we've talked about on this show and other shows about building a community, building relationships with people that are long-term, that are mutually supportive. These all are assets that will help you get where you want to go. And they should be reflected anytime you're going to negotiate a deal. The deal is just intended to be a document that reflects what both people agreed to. But if they don't understand it, or it's not going to work itself out, meaning it can't be performed, you're still going to have a problem. So don't go there.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think it also lends itself to distinguishing what kind of deal are you putting together. So is it purely transactional? Let's say you want to sell a piece of property, right? As you know, and that's pretty basic. It's a description. There's been some maybe due diligence to make sure the title's sound or whatever. The price is in place. And then you go forward. When the deal's over, someone ended up with the land, someone ended up with the funds, and that's pretty much it, unless there was an issue. In most cases, it tends to be pretty specific and easy to understand. If the deal is a future now relationship, like a partnership or taking an equity interest or uh, creating a financing instrument, well, that's going to be foundational to what Karl so clearly defined as what happens when something happens no one anticipated, or when something that was thought to be small turns out to be very, very big, and at the same time, no fault to anybody involved. So there wasn't any deception, there wasn't any manipulation. You're really showing who you're going to be down the line by how you showed yourself at the front end of everything. And again, there are no absolutes, right? Usually there's nobody that's 100% right or wrong. And again, it's the questioning why, what. The other thing I think that's very important negotiation is you can talk a lot, but there's certain things you just shouldn't say because it's not a marketing opportunity, right? It's not a way of just convincing somebody. And, a lot of people say things that build expectation that isn't going to be realized. And people have long memories or they take notes. And it's like, or you open up a Pandora's box because, hey, that was not part of it. And now you threw it into it. And some people try to bring collateral elements or complementary elements and get away from the true, um, in interest or intent. And I think, mature people, I also think that the more sophisticated someone is who you're dealing with, the easier it gets, right? Like Karl says, if you've been around the block 100 times, you've done all these things, they're pretty seasoned. You don't got to bring a lot of people up to that level of speed. If it's the framework, if it's the detail, naturally, that's something people want to know. And again, that's part of qualifying. Hey, is this person brand new? Is doesn't understand? And you don't want to be the explainer and then the deal maker, right? Because if you got to bring somebody up to speed, how do they stay up to speed? And plus, even the questions people ask, it's like that's so far from out of left field. Makes you either more comfortable or less comfortable. So, I think it's being able to go with the flow, work with what you can, understand everybody's going to have questions, everybody's going to have issues, and that's to be expected. But again, prioritizing what's most important. There is always going to be some give and take. You're not going to always get exactly what you went in for. And, again, it's like in your mind, you have to say, well, understanding what I'm hearing, understanding what's important to this person, it doesn't matter that much to me. Too many people stand on principle, instead of being pragmatic and saying, hey, I see what you're saying. I can appreciate it. And if you can't offer it, then at least you have an opportunity to say, here's why I can't do that. Right? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, to that, it is kind of odd sometimes where you get into an agreement and a dispute over agreement or performance, and somebody says, well, this is what it says in the agreement. You're like, yeah, duh, Captain Obvious. That is what it says in the agreement. Reading it back to me isn't going to change the deal. The question is whether or not, if you want to maintain the relationship and the value you may get out of it over a longer term rather than a transactional term, it makes sense to modify the agreement to preserve the relationship. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. It becomes something that I see people saying, well, I got to do this, that. And a lot of the times when you see them in court, you're going, whose ego is paying for this litigation? Because it seems like it's all ego, because the investment in the cost of the dispute is not justifiable by any shape, size, or form. you're going, well, if this is what you intended to get out of the agreement, how can you add all this cost to this deal from litigation and expect to get anything net out of it? It's almost impossible. Um, One of the things that I recommend people do, particularly if they're getting into a deal that they may never have done before, and we do this in raising funding all the time. There's a portion of a document when you're pitching for money called a risk statement. And it's a requirement that the person seeking funding disclose all the things that might go wrong in the future that could somehow limit or kill the deal that you're trying to put together with the funding. And you'll see all kinds of risk in there. Well, it's not a bad idea for any contract to stress test it in advance. So if I went up to someone 3 years ago, I said, okay, let's do this deal, but what if inflation goes up 8% next year? Would this make this deal undoable? Or if the feds raise interest rate by 5-6 points, is that going to blow up your business model? And a lot of people would have said yes to either one of those questions or both of those. And at that point, you should have said, well, maybe we should do something in the agreement to provide for these kinds of things to occur. Whether we have a price change, we have a different this, that, or the other, whatever it's got to be. But if you kind of blindly go forward without taking into account these things that could happen and may even be a high probability of happening, then you're being reckless and you're inviting things to go wrong down the road. And these things are going to be out of your control at that point, and everybody prefers greater control over lesser control. So stress test the agreement, and if the other side doesn't understand what you just said, it may be a clue that they may not be sophisticated enough to do the deal that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that lends itself to covering yourself for liability down the road, right? I mean, having full disclosure, identifying risk factors. One of the primary ones is always what happens if you get hit by a bus, right? And who's going to be the person who could fill your shoes, or what happens, if your business is 80% one customer, and all of a sudden that doesn't work out. And again, at least if it's disclosed and it does happen, well, everybody was full aware of it and either decided to accept the risk or decided, hey, I shared everything with you. It was full disclosure. We didn't expect it to happen, but it was something that everybody was aware of and went into the deal with their eyes wide open. And I think that's important, because I know there's always a tendency for the person looking for money. Well, if I say this or do this, it's going to scare people off, right? So they want to minimize or use different kinds of language where maybe they'll just skate over it. And again, it's who you're dealing with. How do you feel about that person, physically or emotionally? And is that somebody, again, who you feel will be accountable or responsible and say, to Karl's earlier point, you can't anticipate everything, and there's risk factors that no one is aware of. If an earthquake hits, right? I mean,
Like Taiwan this morning. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of Taiwan at the moment, but they have some huge buildings that are no longer vertical to the ground.
well, that's probably what made me think of earthquakes, because I saw the same thing. And, at the end of the day, it is business typically, right? And in business, it's dynamic. Things change, people change, marketplaces change. Like Karl says, if inflation goes to double digits, if margins drop because of a supplier who decided they're not going to, continue on the terms or conditions that you already had depended on. But that's the fun of the marketplace. That's the fun of the person who could ferret out the right deal with the right people. And again, even if you looked at most investment groups, if they made 10 investments, a couple hopefully will be home runs. They already know 3 or 4 are going to kind of go by the wayside, and some will just be in middle ground. And I guess it's like any batting average, you just want to have more winners than losers. I think the biggest element is time investment, right? Because time and money have a way of working together or working apart from each other. And then it's also a matter of, is this worth a reinvestment, right? So in other words, if you can make a deal with the right party, it goes well, and hopefully they're longer term and well funded, well, they're going to step up to the plate to do the next round of financing if they can, because they already have a relationship in place. They already understand the business and the business people better. Why start fresh when you can do more business with less players and get a better sense of security in the deals that you work? So how many times do you see that happening, as where success does show up, expectation is more than achieved, and then people go on to do even more together?
It happens frequently, and again, people who are more experienced doing things that they've done before, so there's less surprises coming along. Quite often, everybody benefits well, and that's what successful business is all about. And there is a cost to creating new relationships, as I'm trying to build new relationships through my newsletter and my LinkedIn live show. Every time I have to see someone, do due diligence on them, go through that learning process of, can I lean on them? Will they lean on me going forward? There's a cost. It's like hiring a new employee. You have to train them up before they become to a level of productivity that you're looking for. Same thing with any contractual relationship. It's going to take time to get it to optimal format. And if you stop at the first deal, you may never get to optimum because you stop short of what might be a better relationship. Continuing negotiations isn't always downwards. It can be upwards to make the deal even better. Go, hey, I saw something. Would you do this, do that? And they go, well, what does it do for me? I go, well, it's not going to do anything for you, but it doesn't cost you anything. So do it for me. And if I see something, then I'll do something in return. But back to the risk factors we were talking about earlier, I think that you should build into your deal fallbacks, as I call it, plan B, plan C, and so forth. All too often you see a contract for a deal and the only fallback is dispute resolution. And you're going, no, that's a jump too far. I'd rather have anticipated that, yeah, if we have a change in pricing, a change in supplier, something like that, how are we going to handle that? And even if we can't come to an agreement today, we can build mechanisms into the contract that says we are going to have periodic meetings between the two parties at least once a quarter, where we're going to talk about how well this deal is going, with the goal of optimizing the deal rather than just worrying about it falling apart. Because no deal is perfect. It's almost never optimum when you do it to start with. So why not consider making it better every day, just like everything else?
Yeah, that's so important and valuable. And what comes to mind is too many people do just focus on the price, the terms, the conditions, and they don't always identify the value add that some parties bring, right? So anybody, not anybody, but people who have something in their account can write a check. Once that check cashes, what other value do they have? So if, let's say, you're into retail, someone who's an expert and has connections in real estate, situations, who can bring landlords in or can bring that. Some people have really good IT backgrounds or system backgrounds. So, their reason for investing, again, goes beyond their money. It's like they've got some expertise, some specialization that maybe gives you a competitive advantage. Or maybe they just have access to great networks of people and says, hey, if you need a CFO, I can find one for you. If you need somebody in marketing, I know people. And that really brings strength to the management beyond themselves and keeps everybody from being totally independent from what goes on in the business. And I think that's where these meetings, board meetings, advisory board meetings come in is, hey, what else, what are you doing I can help you with? Some of it's direct knowledge. Some of it is networking or connections I have. Other things are just, hey, you're walking down a road I've been down before. Here's a few more things you might want to keep in mind. And there's, I guess, also a balance between giving people the respect of being the management. In the past, I once had a board of directors, and one gentleman was a professor at Boston University. He'd fly in, and I was always afraid he'd read something on the plane on the way in, right? And we'd be around a meeting, and someone says, who didn't really know a lot of everything, knew a lot of their specific area. Well, I think this would be great for this business, and I think we should entertain this. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, I'm the one who's going to have to carry it out, right? So, I mean, it's great to have ideas, and I'm aware of it, but it's not as important as this. But then if you don't listen, if you don't give people their proper time and attention, they can get frustrated. They can feel you're acting independently. They wonder, why am I even here? And there is some give and take. And I think that's one of the challenges for people who accept money is they think that they can just work independently of everybody as long as the results are there. But people want a seat at the table. They want a voice that's being heard. And hopefully there's someone who says, well, what do you think? Before the decision is made to let's do it. And you can say, well, I'm aware of that. And here's a couple things that we may not have taken into consideration. But sure, if we can, again, how deep of an investment is it? Right? If it's like, would you talk to this person for me? Sure. Would you decide to change your whole strategy? And then all of a sudden you're flipping and you're flopping, and all of a sudden you become, someone that's easy to work with, but may not be productive in the direction you're taking. What is your sense of after the deal, and now people want to roll up their sleeves too much and jump in?
Yeah, sometimes there is this tendency to accept a contract, the deal structure, as though it's poured in cement. It's cannot be changed. It's now sanctified. So it's sacrilegious to even change the deal. And I've never understood that. I mean, everybody goes, well, my word is my bond, and my contract, I'm going to honor it. I go, yeah, but it was to achieve an objective. It's not the objective. The objective wasn't to reach a deal. It was to create this relationship so the benefits may flow from that. So you have to keep your eye on the goal, not the contract. And if the contract is moving you away from your goal, you should be the first to suggest maybe we should do some changes here, that it's not going to get us where we want to go. And you may lose in terms of not getting everything you wanted out of the agreement, but you still are moving towards your goal, which is what you have to do. Keep your eye on the goal line. And you made a comment earlier that I really would like to underscore. We don't have all the time in the world this morning, maybe next time, but too often people get expectations of what will come out of a deal, which either are not reflected in the deal, meaning the contract doesn't allow for any of those things to occur. And so we basically have people looking at a deal that has little or no resemblance to the expectations. And dissatisfaction is going to happen early and often in that situation. So we talk about managing expectations, and this is particularly true in raising funding. You don't want to go tell some people that you're going to get rich if there's no way possible for you to get rich out of the deal. because the person walks out of the room going, I'm going to be rich. And then 6 months, a year later, they're not rich. They can't have anything except disappointment. And again, that's not a great relationship. That's no relationship at that point.
Yeah. And again, people are people. There are people who take things personal that shouldn't. There are people that want to be friends when they should just be friendly. There's a difference, and because your friend could be your adversary tomorrow. The other thing I've learned, especially if you're working with institutions, is the person you're working with may not be there in 3 months, right? So the person who loves your stuff, knows your stuff, is intimately involved in the industry, and all of a sudden they took another position or for whatever reason, and the new person comes in who has no relationship to that other person, and now you're working with that. So there are some hazards to on the accepting side, that you get surprised, or people decide we're not going to be in this industry anymore and we're getting rid of this investment, or we're selling it off, or we want out, and a lot of people are like, hey, I thought we're going to be in this for 3 years, and this now I'm blindsided, and now your intentions or your direction has changed, and I've already invested in this, I've already committed the strategy to it. So I think both sides have to have some shared responsibility for the deal they made, and some level of accountability related to that. But that's not always the reality of it. No different than you could work a deal with somebody and for some reason they decide, I don't want to do this anymore, or they got to whatever. And I guess that's the fun of the mystery that comes down the road as things change. I do believe the better you perform, the better position you're in, right? So, if you're always asking for forgiveness, it gets kind of challenging because, nobody likes surprises, good or bad. They like to know what they're getting into. When they're into it, they like to know what's happening as it's happening. One thing I do know for sure is you don't want to be holding information that everybody should have, right? If you knew about something 3 months ago and you tried to clean it up or work it out, and all of a sudden it became a bigger deal, then all the trust is gone.
Right.
Right. And that really makes for people to feel bad. People can write off investments if they were well intended, managed, operated. People are working so hard, doing so much, and it just wasn't meant to be for whatever reason. So I think everybody has to go in with their eyes open, has to be at least to the point where I'm giving you everything I know. I'm answering every question you have. And if you feel that's adequate, then we should go forward. I think the one last thing is, what is the demand for what you have? Right? So if you have 12 parties who are interested in making the one deal, then you can really start to focus on what would be the right match. And a lot of times it isn't the amount. I've seen people say, I'll take 20% less to be with this group and to get the benefit of them versus the high dollar offer, and then deal with, all these unknowns. So, Karl, we covered a lot of ground. I mean, it does show how much insight and experience and value add you bring from these conversations. So everything we've talked about is relevant to everybody who is looking to raise capital. And it'd be nice to have those tools in place or knowledge in place for it to happen. Omar's here, came in at the tail end, but always good to see you, Omar. Omar has his show Zoom Party, and he's a great supporter of this show, as well as me being a supporter of his show. The last thing I'd say, anybody who's commenting there, reach out to them if you don't know them. Use this as a networking opportunity, especially for Karl. Karl always offers, I believe, 15 minutes if you have a relevant question or interest in learning more about Karl and what he does, or maybe even working with Karl. So Karl, last words, and we'll get everybody on their way.
I want to thank you for picking such a great word for today's topic, because all relationships require negotiation, no matter whether they're personal or business. They're reflective of the process you go through to form a relationship, to maintain a relationship, and sometimes to unwind a relationship. So it's a skill that everyone should think about and study and improve, because relationships at the end of the day are our most valuable asset.
Well, and again, I hope that comes through loud and clear, that a gentleman like Karl could help you avoid the potholes, in advance, or at least make you aware of them and what's ahead of you if you go forward with financing. So again, you go in with open eyes. So with that, Karl, audience, thank you so much. Tomorrow, I'm going to have Kelly with us, and we'll be taking it to another level. So appreciate everybody. Look forward to talking with you again in 23 hours if possible. Take care. Have a wonderful